At 2:37 hours on March 12, 2026, near Dovzhansk in the occupied Luhansk region, a Russian military freight train rolls northwest through the dark, with fuel, ammunition, and exactly the kind of confidence that usually catches fire. The locomotive is moving at 43 kilometers per hour, steel wheels beating a steady rhythm over worn rail joints, hauling a mixed consist of tank cars and ammunition wagons toward Russian frontline formations in the Luhansk direction. From the cab, it looks routine. Diesel haze, frost on the lower edges of the glass, instrument lights in tired green, a driver and his assistant trading clipped words over the vibration of several thousand tons of mass in motion. Behind them, fuel for vehicles, fuel for generators, fuel for the 1,000 mundane mechanical appetites of war. Further back, ammunition crates and packaged propellant, the kind of cargo that turns one bad night into a spectacularly bad month. But this train is not alone. It just does not know it yet. For the past several hours, Ukrainian intelligence has been building its track in layers. First comes the pattern work, rail node observations, departure timing, load estimates based on wagon type and ordering, thermal checks from forward reconnaissance drones, signal intercepts from rail communications, bits of mundane logistics data that look boring, right up until they form a firing solution. That is how modern ambushes usually begin. Not with heroics, but with spreadsheets and radio discipline. Inside a concealed command position many kilometers away, operators from the 414th Unmanned Systems Brigade, Magyar's Birds, watch a moving icon creep along a digital map. They have already done the geometry. The train's average sector speed is between 40 and 48 kilometers per hour. The target zone near the Sverdlovsk municipal district offers a useful combination of things Russian rail planners hate and drone operators adore. Shallow embankments, broken lines of tree cover, a curve that becomes a straight segment, and inconsistent overlap between local air defense watch and electronic warfare coverage. In plain language, the train has to go there, and the people protecting it cannot look everywhere at once. That matters because intercepting a moving train with strike drones is not just about finding it. It is about solving a chase problem in real time. If the drone flies 145 to 165 kilometers per hour and the target is moving at roughly 12 meters per second, every delay in launch pushes the intercept point hundreds of meters down the track. A 10-second timing error can move impact geometry by more than 120 meters. That is the difference between hitting the fourth fuel tank car and hitting empty ballast behind the train like an idiot with a very expensive remote-controlled lawnmower. The Ukrainian planners choose the window between roughly 2:30 and 3 for a reason. Russian radar and EW in this area do not form one seamless dome. They form patches, dead zones, interference overlaps, and human shift work errors held together by paperwork and optimism. One air defense team assumes the neighboring sector is awake. The neighboring sector assumes the rail corridor is low priority. A local jammer is active, but its operators have a habit of sweeping commercial bands in pulses rather than maintaining a perfectly disciplined barrage, because power management, generator load, and sheer boredom are real things. War is full of advanced systems operated by tired men drinking bad tea at 2 in the morning. Magyar's Birds are not bringing a single drone. They are bringing a package. The primary strike element consists of medium-range FP2 type drones carrying warheads in the 60 to 100 kilogram class. That is far beyond the usual FPV nuisance category. These are not angry toys. These are practical flying demolition charges with cameras, control links, inertial backup, and enough terminal energy to ruin a rail line's entire evening. Supporting them are smaller FPV drones, launched for route confirmation, target discrimination, and follow-up damage assessment. Elsewhere in the same broader operational window, other Ukrainian unmanned assets are also hunting a Russian S-300V launcher and a logistics hub in the region. That is not an accident. It is sequencing. Stretch the defenders, split attention, force Russian operators to answer 3 problems at once, and they usually answer at least one of them badly. The lead Ukrainian drone crews work through the checklist without drama. Battery temperature nominal, video feed stable, control latency acceptable, navigation package aligned, contingency routes loaded. Their aircraft are built for this environment, which means no single guidance method is trusted by itself. Satellite navigation is useful until someone starts spoofing it. Direct radio control is useful until someone jams it. Inertial navigation is useful until drift accumulates. Relay routing is useful until a relay gets dropped. So Ukrainian engineers stack solutions. Frequency hopping control links dance across bands fast enough to complicate narrow band jamming. Inertial units keep a dead reckoning estimate when GNSS gets weird. Some platforms can ride preloaded waypoints for part of the route, then transition back to operator control in terminal approach. Others use relay drones to maintain cleaner command angles and reduce terrain masking.
Here is why that matters. GPS spoofing is basically a lie told to a machine about where it is. Jamming is just screaming so loudly that the machine cannot hear anything else. But inertial navigation is the machine checking its own homework by measuring acceleration and movement over time. Spoof the satellite picture all you want. If the drone knows it just banked left, climbed 20 meters, and accelerated by 3 meters per second squared, Newton is still sitting in the back of the classroom with crossed arms. Physics is rude like that. At 2:41, the Russian train clears a slight curve and enters a straighter section. From above, its thermal signature sharpens. The locomotive glows brightest, engine temperatures pushing well above ambient against the cold earth below. The fuel wagons show uneven surface temperatures depending on fill level, metal thickness, and airflow. The ammunition cars are less thermally distinct, but they are there in the order intelligence predicted. Ukrainian targeteers mark priority aim points. First, fuel tank cars near the center to maximize fire spread and train immobilization. Then ammunition cars, once the consist is slowed or stopped. Burn first, detonate second. Turn a logistics movement into a salvage problem, then into an engineering problem, then into a command problem. In the locomotive cab, the driver gets a vague advisory over internal rail communications about possible UAV activity in the wider area. That is the kind of warning that becomes background noise after 2 years of war. Possible activity is not useful. Possible activity is weather. Possible activity means continue until something explodes. The engineer pushes on. At 2:44, Russian electronic warfare finally notices something is wrong. A local EW team in the sector sees anomalous activity on the spectrum. Not a clean target, not a cinematic red flashing icon, just enough noise and irregularity to make them sit up. They switch from passive monitoring to active jamming, flooding likely drone-controlled bands and degrading civilian navigation frequencies across a broad footprint. On paper, this sounds impressive. In practice, it is like trying to swat mosquitoes by setting your own living room on fire. Broad jamming creates chaos, but it also creates blind spots, fratricide in the spectrum, and the classic Russian problem of every system stepping on every other system's toes. The Ukrainian drones keep coming. One strike drone temporarily loses clean satellite positioning and drops into inertial assisted routing. Another shifts to a different hopping pattern. A smaller FPV Scout climbs to roughly 180 meters for a better line of sight, sees the jamming bloom on signal diagnostics, and confirms the train is still on heading. The relay operator adjusts geometry, tiny corrections, 2 degrees left, nose down 5 meters, speed 152 kilometers per hour, battery draw rising, but acceptable. The whole thing is less Top Gun and more surgical plumbing with explosives. Meanwhile, the Russian side is trying to understand what kind of threat this is. The air defense crew nearest the corridor is looking for larger, cleaner signatures. Their radar software is built to care about helicopters, aircraft, cruise missiles, maybe big drones, not low, intermittent, clutter-hugging attackers the size of household appliances moving against ground return at night. Thermal observers get glimpses, lose them, get them again. Somebody reports multiple contacts. Somebody else thinks they are false returns.
somebody picks up a handset and gets static because the local jammer is now stepping on half the sector's comms. Electronic warfare is wonderful, right up until it starts beating up your own side like a drunk cousin at a wedding.
At 2:46, the intercept is locked. The lead strike drone approaches from the rear quarter, low, then climbs just enough to clear wake turbulence and line up on the first selected fuel tank car. Closing speed is now over 50 meters per second relative. The operator sees the target swell in the feed: black cylindrical tank, ladder silhouette, glinting hardware, steel skin. The warhead is heavy enough that perfection is not required, but precision multiplies effect. Hit too high and you waste blast. Hit too low and you punch through with less internal vapor ignition. Hit center mass at the right angle and the inside of that tank car becomes a physics demonstration nobody survives with dignity. The first impact lands at 2:46 and some seconds. The warhead hits the fuel tank car with a hard white flash, then a bloom. Metal ruptures, internal pressure spikes, fuel aerosolizes and ignites. Temperatures in the combustion zone leap into the thousands of degrees Celsius almost instantly. The fireball expands outward and upward, then rolls along the train's length in a sheet of incandescent vapor and black smoke. The tank shell does not politely leak. It tears, peels, and vents burning fuel in all directions. Overpressure slams into adjacent wagons. Steel fittings become shrapnel. Paint vanishes. Rubber seals and hoses are erased. In the cab, the driver and his assistant feel the shock through the frame before they fully process what just happened. Then the second drone arrives. It strikes another fuel car farther down the consist, this time from a slightly offset angle. That matters because it compounds structural failure and spreads the thermal front. A train is a connected system. Buffers, couplers, brake lines, pressure equalization paths, confined spacing between wagons. Once fire and blast begin walking the consist, each car becomes a delivery service for the next problem. Burning fuel pours downward, pooling beneath axles and sleepers. Flames run along undercarriage lines. Hot fragments pepper adjacent cars. The blast wave ricochets between steel bodies and the embankment. The moving train begins to brake, but braking in panic under damaged load is not a clean maneuver. Momentum keeps several thousand tons surging against themselves. Russian personnel now see drones clearly, which is, unfortunately, too late to be useful. Small arms fire cracks from escort elements and nearby security points. A machine gun opens up in hurried bursts. The tracers look dramatic. They achieve very little. Hitting a maneuvering drone at night, while it closes at over 140 kilometers per hour, is already difficult. Doing it while your comms are degraded, your sight picture is contaminated by firelight, and your own train is becoming a rolling volcano is something between poor tactics and performance art. A smaller Ukrainian FPV dives in behind the first strikes to confirm aimpoint results. The feed shows ruptured tank shells, a spreading linear fire, and at least one ammunition wagon already catching secondary flame exposure. The operator calls it ammo involvement imminent. And then the train really loses the argument. The first ammunition car cooks off in stages. Not one giant movie explosion at first, but a hideous sequence of sympathetic detonations. Propellant burns, packed munitions burst. Shock from one compartment triggers another. Fragmentation begins, slicing outward in cones and arcs. Then a larger internal detonation arrives, and the whole wagon seems to lift and unzip itself. The blast wave punches along the railbed, batters neighbouring cars, and throws fragments hundreds of meters. Secondary explosions now start arriving out of rhythm, irregular and psychologically worse because nobody on the Russian side can tell whether the next bang is the last one or the beginning of something much bigger. The locomotive crew are injured in the chaos. The front section survives the initial inferno only in the technical sense of the word survive. Glass blows, metal fragments rake the cab area. The driver fights for braking control through heat, impact shock, and confusion, while the assistant is thrown against hard surfaces. Whatever schedule mattered 5 minutes ago no longer exists. Within minutes, multiple cars are burning.
Portions of the consist are damaged or wrecked. Sections of railbed are scorched under pooling fuel fires, hot enough to warp fittings and compromise track components. Steel rail does not need to melt to become useless. Heat distortion, sleeper damage, and ballast contamination are plenty. If the fire burns long enough, repairs are no longer a matter of dragging away a few ruined wagons. They become a line restoration job, with engineers, cranes, replacement rail, signalling checks, and clearance teams for unexploded ordnance. That means delay. Delay means rationing. Rationing means frontline units suddenly discovering that operational confidence runs on diesel more than speeches.
Now the back of the envelope math starts hurting. A single tank car can carry tens of tons of fuel. Even if only several fuel wagons are fully destroyed or catastrophically burned, the loss likely runs into the hundreds of tons. Diesel consumption for mechanized formations is obscene by civilian standards. A battalion-sized grouping of armored and support vehicles can burn through tens of tons per day depending on tempo, distance, generator usage, and recovery operations. Add the ammunition cargo and the cost curve gets uglier. Artillery shells, rocket propellant, small arms ammunition, package charges, wagon losses, track damage, locomotive repair, emergency response, line closure, rerouting inefficiency. Suddenly, a strike package built from comparatively cheap unmanned systems is deleting cargo and infrastructure worth millions. It is the kind of exchange ratio that makes accountants cry and generals invent new excuses. Elsewhere in the region, Magyar's birds are also pressing attacks against an S-300 V launcher and a logistics or munitions site. That wider context matters. This is not one lucky strike. It is a method. Hit the launcher and you thin the shield. Hit the hub and you poison the reserve. Hit the train and you break the moving artery between them. Russian logistics is still dangerous, still adaptive, still large, but rail traffic is predictable in a way frontline maneuver is not. Trains have routes, timetables, axle loads, choke points. That makes them efficient, and it also makes them beautifully, tragically targetable. By first light, the consequences are already multiplying. The immediate sector loses part of a resupply movement meant for frontline units in the Luhansk direction. Replacement cargo has to be sourced, loaded, and rerouted. Traffic managers must account for damaged rolling stock and blocked track. Units expecting fuel and ammunition today may now get them tomorrow, or in smaller parcels by road, which is slower, riskier, and much more vulnerable to further drone work. This is how cheap unmanned warfare bends large industrial systems, not always by annihilating everything, but by forcing the enemy to move slower, spend more, guard more, and trust less. And trust is expensive. Somewhere in occupied Luhansk, Russian officers are already writing reports about sabotage, air defense failure, communications disruption, rail vulnerability, driver casualties, and emergency line restoration. Somewhere else, Ukrainian operators are packing equipment, shifting positions, reviewing thermal footage, and already thinking about the next artery, the next timetable, the next night when several small aircraft and a few kilograms of electronics go looking for several thousand tons of Russian certainty. A few strike drones costing a fraction of a missile just turned a military train, its fuel, its ammunition, and its timetable into a burning balance sheet. And that is exactly what the future of this war looks like.